Got a minute or two? We have a way to make it not okay. Welcome to Sinister Minutes. I'm your host, writer and storyteller, Kurt Homer. Next to me is the master of macabre musical musings, the maestro of mood, Tim Parker. Together, let us take you on a journey into the dark heart of disturbing. Sinister Minutes. It's not okay. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional, because like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of abuse, addiction, alcohol, blood, bodily fluids, pundits, bones, bullying, burning, cancer, cannibalism, cheating, clowns, coma, confinement, control, cults, death, decapitation, depression, diet, divorce, domestic abuse, drowning, drugs, dying, eating disorders, epidemics, experimentation, family conflict, fear, fighting, fire, gaslighting, ghosts, gore, guns, harassment, hate crimes, hazing, homelessness, homicide, hospitalization, hostage situations, hostile work environments, illness, incarceration, infidelity, injury, institutionalization, kidnapping, manipulation, medical procedures, memory problems, mental health issues, military service, misogyny, murder, mutilation, needles, nightmares, nudity, pain, panic attacks, paralysis, physical abuse, pornography, physical assault, police brutality, poverty, profanity, religion, robbery, scars, screaming, self-harm, smoking, hate, spiders, stabbing, stalking, starvation, substance abuse, suicide, terrorism, threats, torture, victim blaming, violence, war, weapons, weather, and maybe, just maybe, witches. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sinister Minutes podcast. Thank you so much, as always, for giving us a listen, for telling your friends to check us out, and for giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Every other Friday, we're striving to get new episodes out for you. Yes, you, our lovely and slightly twisted listeners, the ones who bring both our creativity and our most demented ideas to the forefront. We'd love to hear from you, so look for us on Facebook under Sinister Minutes, or just reach out to us via sinisterminutes@gmail.com. Today's episode of Sinister Minutes introduces part 1 of a 3-part story. Beautiful tells the story of a young woman who invokes Freya, the Norse goddess who counts among her many attributes those of love, sex, also war and death, and finally sorcery. As the title implies, it's beauty she's asking for, and of course the goddess grants her wish. Simple, right? If you've listened to any of our other stories here at Sinister Minutes, you know nothing is ever that simple. We hope you enjoy today's story. Enjoy it enough to come back and check out parts 2 and 3. As both Tim and I feel that our own beauty is unmatched, we instead invoked a different goddess, one that more closely fits our personal endeavors. Eris, goddess of discord. We last saw her walking away, shaking her head, and muttering that of all the people she's met, we are perhaps the two who are most not okay. Beautiful, written and narrated by Kurt Homan. Emma glanced at the steaming bowl. She couldn't blame the chef. Preparation had been left to her, and she'd done all she could. The main ingredient was the inescapable problem. A fine mince, hours of slow cooking, added vegetables, and a host of savory spices should have rendered both texture and flavor undetectable. Yet for Emma, vegetarian since childhood, nothing could hide the fact that each spoonful contained dead flesh, meat, organ meat, hearts. She hadn't inquired about the animals the hearts had come from, nor what butcher shop had sold them. Her natural curiosity would normally have pulled her into those details, but she'd kept her questions to herself. Lifting the spoon in the dim light offered by the flickering candles on the table, she tried telling herself that nothing but vegan protein crumbles crossed her lips. The thick, meaty scent of offal assaulting her nostrils crushed that pretense. Her meal formed part of an elaborate ceremony, practiced and carefully recorded centuries earlier. Filled with doubt, Emma nonetheless had to plug forward, had to make whatever sacrifices necessary, had to make it work. She gagged down another bite, revulsed by each spoonful, but determined to finish the bowl. Fighting her rising nausea, she swallowed hard. She'd been the one to piece together the details, and her employer had verified the sources as factual. She'd had no choice but to set aside her disbelief, follow the directions, and hope with each step that completing the ritual checklist would bring success. Dessert was easier. The honeyed taste of the porridge almost replaced that of the disgusting stew. Honey extended into 2 glasses of mead she'd poured, one for her and one for the guest yet to arrive. Emma's attire was no less ceremonial than her meal. A black cape adorned with jewels, gold and amber, deep red garnet, and black jet hung heavy on her shoulders. The matching black hood lined with white cut off her peripheral vision and muffled her hearing. Her feet dripped with sweat in fur-lined boots, and the leather gloves, in spite of the near-perfect fit, made every action challenging. Glancing up to check the clock, her gaze fell upon a Chinese opera mask displayed on the wall, red lips shining bright against the stark black and white face. Crafted in another time and a far different culture, its disdainful smirk seemed to mock her for the foolishness of her ritual. Emma's eyes drifted to the framed photo hanging below the mask. 2 women, side by side. One dark-haired, one blonde. One serious, unhappy to have been captured by the lens. The other smiling broadly, naturally photogenic. Emma, so easily forgettable.
and Mia, the radiant, beautiful child in a woman's body. As different as two sisters could be. She choked back a sob. Whatever the opera mask might think of her, she'd follow each instruction to the letter. Every detail had been studied and faithfully reproduced, right down to the chicken feathers that stuffed the cushion on her chair. Only a single item remained. Ancient scribes, like society columnists of their era, had recorded every detail of fabric, color, and cut of the required attire. They'd expended almost as much ink on the contents of the meal, stopping just short of sharing the recipes. But of the words and music, the song that actually called the guest, of that they'd written little, only that the summoning song had been performed. Emma's employer had located a singer living in the desolate northeastern part of Iceland who claimed an unbroken lineage dating back 1,000 years. He'd persuaded the woman, through reward or other means, to share her familial knowledge. Emma sipped the mead, its honey bouquet tickling her nostrils, then pressed the play button. A woman's voice, accompanied by a simple drumbeat, filled the room. Emma knew a smattering of Icelandic, but the lyrics provided little that was familiar, and trying to make sense of them was frustrating. She made herself stop and instead focused on the nearest candle, rocking back and forth in her seat to the haunting tune. "So," said a voice nearby, "I am here." Emma gasped, twisting back and forth to find the source of the voice, the thick hood draped over her head restricting her to tunnel vision. "Who's that? Oh my God!" The woman stood a few feet away. More impressive and frightening were the two panthers flanking her, one jet black, one pure white. She had a hand atop each of their heads, level with her waist. 3 pairs of intense blue eyes stared at Emma from the center of her tiny living room. There'd been no knock at the door, no warning of entry, not even a creak in the floorboards of the tired building that housed her apartment. Her heart pounding, Emma began to rise and then, staring at the big cats, sat back down. "Well?" The woman's gaze captured Emma's attire and the contents of the table. "You've done your homework. Do you? Would you please shut that off?" Hands shaking, Emma fumbled with the little speaker in the center of the table. Her third stab at the power button connected, and the music died away. In the silence, she heard a low rumble. Were the panthers purring or growling? "Better," said the woman. "Gods, that song drones on. And I have to say, while that is a lovely cloak you're wearing, it seems quite impractical. Take your hood down. Let me see who I am speaking to." With the hood off, Emma realized how hot she had been underneath. She'd dressed as the sagas had described, but in those tales from 1,000 years earlier, the ritual had taken place outside in a subarctic climate. In contrast, the woman before her wore an outfit much better suited for a modern, temperate city apartment. An indigo skirt and matching blazer that complemented shoulder-length, strawberry blonde hair. Emma found her voice. "Are you Freya?" The woman chuckled. "That title is acceptable. Why have you called on me?" Emma squeezed her eyes closed. The ritual had actually worked. Did she dare hope? When she opened them again, Freya and her panthers were still there. She cleared her throat, her practiced lines returning to her. "This is gonna sound selfish. You have no idea some of the requests I've encountered." Long, manicured fingernails massaged the heads of the 2 cats. "Ask." Emma took a deep breath, hoping to slow her still pounding heart. "Every day I step outside, interact with the world. She spoke the lines slowly, just as she had practiced them. And every day the world ignores me. I want something more, something extra. Go on. The woman's gaze traveled around the apartment. Unlike their master, her pets did not waver in their focus on Emma. Maybe they thought of her as a new toy, or a snack, or both. Some people always get noticed, recited Emma. They walk down the street and heads turn, come into a room and everybody shuts up and stares. They're the beautiful people. That's what I want. You, Freya's focus circled back to Emma. You want to be beautiful. Yes, no, what I mean is not just attractive, but beautiful in the way people notice. That's all? You're not going to ask for money? Fine jewelry? Freya glanced down at her companions. Perhaps the ability to make cats do your bidding. Emma wanted much more, but shook her head. I just want to be beautiful. Then let's make a change. Freya stepped forward, away from the cats and close enough to lay her hand on Emma's forehead. Soft, cool fingers traced slowly across her face. That will do. A tingle remained where Emma had been touched, nothing more. What do you mean? Freya lay a hand beneath Emma's chin and raised it until their eyes met. You're beautiful now. Emma turned aside, unable to bear the intensity of the other woman's gaze. That's it? Freya stepped back, lips tight. You did your research. You know who I am. Do not insult me. No, Emma raised her hands, palms out. I didn't mean anything, but... She trailed off as she turned toward the hall mirror. Apart from a slight flush to her skin, she looked the same. Puffy cheeks, a crook in the nose, hair that likely plotted to escape her scalp. Far from beautiful. Emma blinked rapidly. You just wave your hand over me? Just like that, I'm beautiful? Did you expect a flash of lightning? Freya put her hand on her hip. Are you seeking additional theatrics in your life as well? She turned away, both panthers staring at Emma for another lingering moment before following their master. Something had changed about the woman's appearance, and it took Emma a second to grasp what it was. The outline of the door was visible through the bodies of the woman and the two big cats. It grew more defined the longer she stared. What the... I've granted your wish. The woman's form faded further from view with each step toward the door. I will ask for something in return one day. When barely visible, she spoke again. One last thing. Emma strained to hear the woman's voice, now little more than a whisper. If you need to call me again, skip the stew. Your breath is rank. No sign remained of the woman, panthers, or any visitors at all. Emma rose to her feet and shrugged off the heavy cloak, knocking over a candle. It sputtered out on the floor. On the table, the second glass, which no one had touched, sat empty. The mirror on her bedroom door provided the most complete picture, but its assessment matched the one in the hall. No change in her appearance, yet Freya, goddess of sorcery, sex, and beauty, had come. The following morning, Emma turned in bed to look at the clock and groaned. She'd forgotten to set her alarm and was running late. She stumbled into the bathroom, brushed her teeth while sitting on the toilet, and looked longingly at the shower she had no time to take. A glance in the mirror as she dashed to her closet belied her hopes that some overnight miracle had taken place. On the left, her hair lay perfectly flat, while on the right, It stuck out at an angle. She looked like she'd been sitting next to an open window in a speeding car. Beneath her eyes, dark circles told the world about the sleep she'd missed, while on the side of her nose, a pimple grew large and red. She looked like something scraped from a shoe, far from beautiful. Emma scrambled into the semblance of an outfit and dashed out, hoping her hair might magically fall into place as she raced to the bus stop. The bus pulled up just as she got there, and she queued up behind a half-dozen other bleary-eyed workers. All of them no doubt felt they were en route to their own personal hells, but she'd have traded with any of them in an instant. A day filled with angry customers, nasty co-workers, even a sadistic boss would fill her commute with far less dread. She boarded, swiped her pass, and looked down the aisle. The seats were filled, and she reached for a strap, thankful she'd at least slapped on deodorant before dashing out the door. Excuse me, would you like my seat? Emma glanced around, expecting to see someone on crutches. Only when the man next to her rose, smiled, and gestured to his seat did she realize he'd been talking to her. No one had ever given up a seat for her, no matter how much desperation she'd worn. After taking the man's seat, she examined him more closely. Unlike many men, he looked comfortable in a suit and tie. It had likely been tailored for his broad-shouldered frame. He caught her staring and gave her another handsome grin. She turned away and stared down at the floor of the bus, striving to avoid any more eye contact. At her building, the doorman gestured her through, nudging aside two people on the sidewalk to clear her path. Most days she'd forced her way through and considered herself lucky to even get a nod from the uniformed man. Had it, whatever Freya had done, actually worked? The elevator sat across from a wall of mirrors, and after she pressed the button, she turned to check her appearance. No improvements. Was it her imagination that people were treating her differently? When the doors opened, she kept her eyes down and entered the already crowded car, staking out a spot near the center. 5, please. The man nearest the panel punched in her request, and then broke elevator protocol by speaking to her. 5 is an excellent floor to visit today. Was he mocking her? She looked up. Okay. My name's Ted. His brown pinstripe shirt and clashing maroon necktie probably cost as much as the combined contents of Emma's closet. I work on 7. Hi, Ted. 7, the home of the hotshot lawyers. The door opened on 2, and a woman in a beige pantsuit pushed from the back of the car. Amidst the jostle, Ted squeezed himself around a bearded man in a dark turban to stand next to Emma. As the door closed again, he leaned in close and whispered, "There's always one, right?" Excuse me? Emma kept her eyes straight ahead, avoiding eye contact and curling her fingers into a fist. She needed to get away from Ted, quickly. Knew she'd be getting off first, but still stood all the way in the back. Answering her silent prayers, the elevator doors opened again, and Emma pushed her way out. Ted called after her, "Hey, you never told me your name." Only when the elevator chimed did Emma look back to make sure that the doors were closed and that she stood alone in the hallway. No, Ted, I didn't. She tapped her key card at the unmarked door, then stepped inside. The windowless office was dark, save a few flickering shadows from monitors left on overnight. The temperature felt like a walk-in freezer. That meant he was already there. "Well?" said a deep voice from somewhere in the darkness. It worked, Emma shuddered, not just because of the cold. She came. "Excellent." Emma had never seen her employer, but what she envisioned of his smile practically radiating out of the darkness made her shiver all the more.
Tell me everything.
Emma hugged herself against the cold. Where should I start?
Describe her to me.
Emma told him about the panthers, then began to describe the woman's attire.
Skip that, he said, interrupting her. Tell me about her eyes, her hair, her skin.
His interests in the mysterious woman slanted toward the physical, not surprising. Each word she spoke made Emma feel more unclean.
Exquisite, he said when she finished. And did she grant your boon?
She said she did. He chuckled, his laughter chilling the air even further.
So you do not see it yourself? She is clever, that one. I must see her handiwork.
A sudden glare forced Emma to shield her eyes. The office lights remained low, except for the ones directly over her head. She was caught on the stage in a bright spotlight.
Drop your arm, he ordered. You may keep your eyes closed.
As she lowered her hand, Emma felt utterly exposed, no less so than if he'd asked her to also drop her clothing to the floor. Unable to control her shame, she focused on the hum of the computers, the ticking of the wall clock, her own breathing. Anything except the thought of him standing there, staring at her from within the shadows. Most days, she sat alone in the office, receiving remote instructions via email or message. She believed once that she was merely the first, and that others would be joining her. Others to perform their tasks at the 20-odd desks that formed the cubicle farm. Others with whom she'd find some common ground, at least where it came to their employer. Others who'd also been coerced to work for him. But in the weeks since he'd recruited her, Emma hadn't seen another soul, not in the office, nor even on the 5th floor. If she requested a book or paper, no matter how rare or obscure, it appeared on her desk the next morning. It was the sort of job she dreamed of when she'd pursued her thesis in translation studies. Pure research, unlimited resources, and no one interfering with hours of careful reading and transcription. He paid her in cash for her time, more than she'd earned at any other job. Had he simply approached her with an offer of employment, she might well have jumped at the chance. But an offer implied choice, and he'd shown zero interest in giving her that.
Her charm works well on you, he said at last. I can see through it, of course, but others will not. Go now. Have fun. But keep your phone nearby. I will contact you.
But what about...
I said I will contact you.
When the door clicked a moment later, she opened her eyes. Under normal lighting, the space looked like a typical office, except for the lack of workers. Emma stood alone, shivering even as the temperature rose. Have fun. Emma hated him all the more for saying that. For once the world thinks you're a beauty, so go take advantage of the world. In his mind, he'd thrown her a bone, a treat for a dog he'd trained for weeks. Of course, he'd skipped over any discussion of what she wanted, of why she'd agreed to work for him in the first place. She wiped her eyes, rubbing away the tears that welled up. She'd do as she was told, for Mia's sake. I will contact you. From her purse, she pulled the burner phone he'd provided. The only way he ever contacted her outside the office. She checked the battery charge. Yanking open the door, she strode into the deserted hallway. The other office doors remained forever closed, no sign of light behind the pulled blinds. Emma strode to the elevator and hit the button. Ted's leering smile flashed across her memory, and she popped through the stairwell door just as she heard the chime announcing the elevator's arrival. She took the stairs to the second floor, and from there cut down the hallway to the back stairs, then exited through the service door. Before she'd walked a block, she noticed eyes following her progress. She turned, catching people she'd passed looking over their shoulders at her. When she looked forward again, a man with a bushy silver beard bumped into her shoulder, then waggled equally bushy eyebrows at her as he passed. A drugstore provided a pair of cheap sunglasses that covered half her face, and a ball cap under which to tuck her hair. Only when she'd walked another block without further incident did she feel brave enough to stop at a food truck. Barely able to read the menu through the dark sunglasses, she hoped the charm wore off soon. The ritual had worked. She'd translated the old manuscripts and made educated guesses about any sections that were either unintelligible or left out entirely. She'd played her role, and everything had fallen into place. Still, the woman appearing in her apartment had scared the hell out of her. Reading about deities speaking to ancient storytellers was nothing like encountering one in your own living room. Freya had provided what Emma had requested. The effectiveness of the charm was obvious. Only Emma herself remained unaffected. She'd confirmed her appearance yet again in the tiny mirror atop the sunglass stand at the drugstore. Even her employer had seen the charm, although he'd also seen through it. The words Emma had spoken had been rehearsed, not at all from her heart. It had seemed an appropriate favor to ask of the goddess, but in truth, she couldn't imagine anything she'd desire less. Beautiful required time and effort she didn't want to expend. Invisible would be much more useful. Mia was the beautiful one. She couldn't help but draw attention to herself. Forever trapped in a childlike state, awash with innocence, Mia would never fully grasp the dangers of the world. And Emma, who had grown too complacent about her sister, had allowed her to be snatched away. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright 2024 by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.